Hi, I'm Dr. Scott Watson, and in this video, I'll give an overview of how sound from live performers in contemporary worship, both voices and instruments, makes it through the various components of the sound system out to those worshiping along in the congregation. Let's start on the platform where we gather the signals. Vocalists, for instance, sing into microphones. There are basically two types of mics, dynamic and condenser. Let me summarize the important differences between dynamic and condenser microphones. Dynamic mics are generally less expensive, more sturdy and rigorous. They don't require a preamp to make the signal strong enough. They're good for close-up work, but generally not as good at capturing higher frequencies. The proximity effect, a low-frequency punch heard as a singer gets close to the mic, is much more evident with dynamic mics. Dynamic mics, such as the Shure SM58, are the oft-used choice for individual singers in live performance. You'll often find an SM57, another dynamic mic, in use to mic drums, brass, any solo instrument in live performance, or even a guitar amp. Condenser mics are usually more expensive, more fragile, and they do require preamp voltage, a 48-volt boost called phantom power sometimes. This is usually sent from the mixing board or an audio interface. Condenser mics are better at capturing sounds from a distance. They handle higher frequencies better, but the proximity effect isn't as evident with these mics. Condenser mics are often the mic of choice in studio settings for vocalists and some instruments such as acoustic guitar, cello, or flute. Condenser mics are better at directional pattern control, so they might be the right choice to capture a choir, singing in front of the mic while filtering out the drum set off to the side. As you can see, for a variety of reasons, dynamic mics are used more in live performance and condenser mics are used more in the studio. Let's talk about mic directional pattern. There are many rated parameters that we could go into regarding the performance of different microphones, including frequency response, sensitivity, maximum sound pressure level. We're not going to go into all of that in this overview video, but I do want to share a bit about the mic's directional pattern. Most mics have a lima bean shaped area in which the signal is picked up strongly. This is called a cardioid pattern. It's good to be in front of the mic, but you can be off axis a bit and the mic will still work well. Some microphones are bidirectional, like a figure 8. And other mics are omnidirectional, where singers or players can be anywhere in the 360 degrees around the mic and be picked up well. Supercardioid and hypercardioid mics are more focused on sounds from the front and can filter out rear and ambient sounds. But again, most mics you'll use in day-to-day performing and recording have cardioid patterns. Of course, mics have to be connected with cables to the sound system. All live performance mics use XLR cables. The female end of the cable snaps into the bottom of the mic, and the male end of the cable plugs into a jack on the floor or wall of the platform. Each of these jacks are connected to a channel of the mixing board via low impedance XLR cables. Low impedance cables offer little electronic resistance and are better for long distance runs, such as a cable that has to run, say, 50 or 75 or 100 feet from the platform to the mixing board. Let's talk about electronic instruments like guitars and keyboards, things like that. Just like the vocal mics that are going to go into a channel of the mixing board, all of these electronic instruments are going to be routed to their separate channel in the mixing board. However, these instruments have a 1/4 inch cable, sometimes called a phone cable, the typical guitar cable, the 1/4 inch jack. That's a high impedance cable that comes out of those instruments. So rather than run that high impedance right up to the mixing board, what is usually done is those instruments go into a direct box. The high impedance 1/4 inch jack will go into one side of a direct box, and then the direct box steps down the impedance to low impedance, so it comes out on the other end of the direct box as an XLR cable, and then that goes up to the mixing board. So that idea of converting high impedance to low impedance so that you can make the long run to the mixing board is why we use direct boxes, sometimes called DI boxes. Oh, and one more thing. Sometimes a guitarist likes the way the guitar sounds coming out of the amp. So instead of going directly to the mixing board from the guitar through a direct box, what a guitarist might do is put a microphone in front of the amp, right? His or her amp, and then mic the sound of the guitar coming out of that amp, and then that microphone would then be run up to the channel of the mixing board. If you do it that way, right, that microphone that's miking the amp would be an XLR mic, so you wouldn't need a direct box. One negative of using an amplifier on the platform is now you have some sound on the platform that the mixing guy cannot control, right? The person running sound is not going to be able to control how loud that amp is in the mix coming into the house. So some people prefer just to use the direct box right into the sound system. The guitarist that likes the amp, or the bass player that likes his or her amp on the platform, has to be sensitive to not have that amp too loud, or in a way that conflicts with the overall mix that the sound mixer for the house is doing. Speaking of hard to control sound on the stage or platform, let's talk about the drum set. If you've played in a contemporary praise band, or sit in the congregation and hear one where you worship, you are probably familiar with the challenge of controlling the sound of the drum set. Just the idea of having acoustic drums on the platform which are going to be heard, very clearly, strongly, that's always a concern. So for that reason, sometimes drum sets are placed in these plexiglass enclosures on the platform, sometimes called aquariums, and that contains the acoustic sound of the drums, and then the drums are mic'd separately. Maybe there'll be a mic on the kick drum, a mic on the snare drum, a mic above the cymbals, things like that. And then all of those mics go to channels in the mixing board. Another solution for controlling the drum set sound is to use an electronic drum set controller kit, such as Roland's famous V-drums, where the parts of the drum set are actually rubberized triggers for sampled or virtual drum sounds. And their volumes are easier to control and mix from the board. It's a pretty high-tech solution, but some drummers prefer it, and some drummers don't like playing those V drums, so something that you have to deal with. Okay, so we've gathered all of these signals from the platform. Vocalists through microphones. An acoustic guitar could be through a microphone, or it could be direct box, and electric guitars through direct box, bass guitars through direct box, or miking their amps, keyboard player through a direct box, the drum set, or V drums, and all of those signals have to go up to the mixing board. I mentioned that we use low impedance XLR cables to run the signals from the platform to different channels in the mixing board. And this is a conventional analog solution that has been used for a long time. However, there is a system called D.A.N.T.E. It's a digital system for relaying these gathered signals up to the mixing board. The proprietary name D.A.N.T.E. is an acronym for Digital Audio Network through Ethernet. The cables coming from the stage mics and instruments are still analog. They're either XLR cables or they're analog quarter-inch cables that are run through direct boxes and become XLR cables. But all of these XLR cables get patched into a master unit on the platform where the analog signals are digitized and sent up to the mixing board through a single Ethernet cable. D.A.N.T.E. is fast and can handle hundreds of channels of audio in a single Ethernet cable. You can see why it's becoming more and more common. Okay. Let's talk about the mixing board. You gather your signals from the platform, send them to the mixing board, whether via conventional analog cables or digitally via D.A.N.T.E. Each signal is assigned a separate channel in the mixing board so the person running the sound can adjust the levels for a balanced mix. Equalization, which is essentially boosting certain frequency bands, such as the highs, the mid-ranges, the lows, that can be applied in the mixing board, and so can other effects such as compression or reverb if desired. So you can add those effects at the board. Now, let's talk about getting sound from the board, out into the house. So the mixing board will have two main outs for stereo left and stereo right. That is if it's just a stereo system and not surround sound or something more complicated. Those are sent out to house speakers. If the mixing board has an onboard powered amplifier, its output can be sent to unpowered speakers. If it doesn't, which is more common in larger installations, the output needs to be sent to an amplifier, or the speakers themselves have to have power, be powered speakers. Monitoring, the people that are on the platform, remember, they were sending their signals directly from their keyboard or their guitar through a direct box up to the platform, which means they're not really actually hearing themselves on stage. Or even though the vocalist is singing into the microphone, maybe one vocalist can hear him or herself, but maybe they can't really hear somebody across the platform. So monitoring is a huge thing that we haven't discussed yet, the idea of the singers and the players needing to hear themselves. The mixing board can send the signals it receives from the platform back to the platform to monitors so that the singers and players know how they sound. These signals that are sent up to the platform, well, they can be sent back to the platform. Some monitors would be things like wedge monitors, these speakers that actually face the musicians and send sound as directed from the board, send sound up to the platform. Of course, that does create sound on the platform. A little bit more savvy of a solution is to have monitors that go into the ears of the musicians. So sometimes you've seen little boxes that are right next to every one of the players and singers, and those are individual personal monitor boxes. Some of the brand names that you might have heard are things like Aviom or Live Mix. Anyway, these companies make sort of individual mixers so that the signal sent back from the mixing board to the platform goes into these individual personal monitor boxes, and then each player can set what they want to hear. Maybe one player only wants to hear the keyboard. Maybe you're a vocalist and all you want to hear is the keyboard and the bass, and you don't want to hear anything else. And so you can turn everybody else down, or you can turn them very low and have those two instruments louder in your mix. So you create your own mix that you're hearing. So that's pretty customized, and a lot of people prefer that. So those are solutions that allow the players via headphones or earbuds to hear all of the players, or as many players as they want. Oh, and one more thing I should mention is that in more contemporary worship, we sometimes are seeing that players are also playing along to multi-tracks. They're hearing stems, or they're hearing instruments that actually aren't live participating in the worship. They're playing along to a recording of those. They're hearing a click track, and they're hearing maybe a drum loop, or they're hearing maybe a cello that isn't even, or a mandolin, or a banjo, or something that just isn't part of the praise team. They're hearing those tracks. Some DAW, digital audio workstation, is actually playing along with the live players. So again, the monitor speakers allow our musicians to hear those things in real time as they're performing. So, as you can see, there's a lot of different components of live sound that performers, church musicians have to be aware of. And this is just an overview that looks at those separate steps in that signal chain.